Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's my pleasure to have a conversation to hear a startup story from Ayisha Fareed, who is the co-founder and CEO of Panhwar Jet. Welcome, Ayisha.
Thank you, JJ. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, you bet. So I'd like to hear about Panhwar Jet. In a couple minutes, can you tell us what that is?
So Panhwar Jet is the Newport Beach headquartered startup, and we have the assembly and operations in Heber City, Utah. We are designing and building the world's all-electric luxury business jet, which is self-charging. We are actually defining the new future of aviation, where speed and range has fewer limitations.
Wow, that's a big idea. Why in the world are you doing this? Why did you start this company?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Actually, just near to pandemic or beginning of pandemic, me and my co-founder, we were looking to buy a jet. And then we encountered a problem to own a fossil fuel jet. First of all, there was long waits to have a plane. And then it was highly expensive to maintain and operate them. And also, not to mention high carbon emissions, noise pollution. It's really very, very noisy. And then compromised comfort. You know, we can't stand up. Literally, we have to be like a duck, as my co-founder says. We can't stand up. So the whole idea, we thought that there was a need and there was a huge demand that we need to have a clean all-electric jet. But the current battery in the market is not that efficient to make the jets fly more than 45 minutes, which is not suitable for many, people to fly. This is very short distance. So that's where Panhwar, me and my co-founder, have innovated this disruptive self-charging technology that enables the plane to fly for more than 12 hours, non-stop, without the need of heavy batteries, while maintaining the speed of 300 plus miles per hour.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, so this is a passenger jet. And how many people will it hold?
This will be about 6 to 8 passengers.
Okay, all right. And this is clearly a disruptive technology because it's my understanding, I'm no expert, but virtually all the other passenger jets are fossil fuel based, right? And so your startup is going to shake up the industry. How has the reception been by the industry about what you're doing?
Yes, indeed, JJ, you're right over there. Panhwar Jet's unique patent pending technology has solved many problems of the existing battery limitations that we have right now. Panhwar is also hyper-focused on providing super flight experience by using clean and sustainable energy, which will create the new future of aviation, and where there is no limitation of speed and range. Several investors are really intrigued by the innovation and wish to join hands with us. They understand that the electric aircraft is the future of Panhwar is the future of aviation, but Panhwar is like 10 steps ahead due to patent pending self-charging technology. And that is the groundbreaking and game changer for the industry of aviation.
So speaking of investors, your plane has yet to fly. You've been in the R&D stage, and you're preparing to assemble it in the near future and fly. Yet you've already received funding. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
We just recently received funding. Actually, we are expecting to go public in next 9 to 12 months. And that's the reason why investors want to join at the early stage. Yes, it's mostly due to our unique patent pending technology that makes us a future leader in the aviation industry. We did receive also many several term sheets, but our strategic plan was to self-fund until Electrobird is launched to have a competitive valuation. However, our decision changed with our new investors, who are Wall-Street Group, because this decision was actually derived by the mutual passion. We saw that their team spirit and their hunger to disrupt this aviation industry just made us to change our plan and then go ahead with this funding, because it does not only bring money, but there is a strategic team behind who is trying to come up with this aviation with this Panhwar jet together.
Yeah, so clarification, Electrobird, that's your first plane, or would we call it a prototype? Is that correct?
That's right.
Right. And so that is the first effort that we'll see, I guess, possibly here in the fourth quarter. That's really exciting that the investors, in advance of the plane flying, and simply an embrace of the really disruptive technology, said they're in. That's terribly exciting, because I know from my experience, and I'm sure you've seen it, many investors in other industries want to wait until you've got traction, you're in revenue, and you're starting to scale. So this one is different, is it not?
It's always different with us, but this time, yes, because of the technology, we are clear leaders, and we actually, with the Electrobird, as you mentioned, we are looking to break several world records, and this is going to come soon. In next 2 months, we are currently working on the manufacturing of Electrobird, and once this is up in the air, our technology will be revealed, and we will prove the technology, and people will see, and then we will start building our luxury business jets starting November of this year.
So that's interesting. So can you tell me about the marketplace for a luxury business jet? Who's going to be the buyer? Who's going to be the user?
Yeah, sure. This luxury business jet is for the business owners and senior executives and charter companies, although we are receiving a lot of interest also from cargo companies, which we are currently evaluating at the moment. But there are many people who are connecting with us and want to start with this jet.
Interesting. So it's a wealthy individual, the owner of a company, charter, but I guess there could be other uses of your technology. beyond just aviation too, right?
Yes, that's very true. Right now, our patent pending technology is the groundbreaking. There's nothing like it right now. So it has many avenues other than aviation where we can apply this cost-effective, clean, and noise-free source of electricity. We just want to start with this, and then we have a lot of opportunities.
Yeah. So it's 5 years from now, and Panhwar Jet is delivering planes, I guess, potentially all over the world. What's your vision for electric planes as a solution in the future?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. We are expecting by 2030, we should have electric planes for up to 100 passengers for commercial purposes. So yeah, this is our future plan.
Well. Right.
That's right.
Right. Interesting. This is a question maybe you've been giving some thought to. You've got to collaborate with the FAA here in the U.S., right? And sometimes that can be a kind of a deliberate process. How do you work with that type of entity and communicate to them about the technology?
Yes, actually, that's a very good question, JJ. Currently, my co-founder, Nick, is already in talks with FAA people, and we are trying, because the Electrobird does not need FAA certification right now. It's a trainer plane, but we are manufacturing on the standards what FAA have, the requirements, and we are in talks with them. So it makes it easier to have the business jets approved in a shorter time. We are expecting in 9 to 12 months, we should be getting FAA certification.
And my mind is spinning as I talk with you here. From a airport perspective, is it any different for an electric plane to come and go than it is with a fossil fuel plane?
No, we will have the same infrastructure. Most of the now currently electric planes, they need charging stations, but for us, we do not need the charging stations. It will be charged while it's flying. We just use about 10 to 20% of the battery, while in the air, we will be charging the batteries, and we won't be needing it because of the self-charging technology that we have. So as coming back to your question, nothing changes except, we are more cost efficient and we have a better solution.
Well, it sounds really exciting, and I look forward to following Panhwar Jet, not only for the next few months, to see the Electrobird fly, but to watch your company grow and expand. So Ayisha, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll maybe have you come back next year and tell us how it went. So thank you.
Sure, I would like to thank you so much for having me. And to add to your question, we are zero carbon emission. So yes, that's the complete game changer comparing to the jets currently with fossil fuel.
You are disruptive, no doubt.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to have a conversation with Richie Galinato, who is co-founder and CEO at Prospect. Richie has a varied background, I guess, including Naval Nuclear Power School. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I was a U.S. Navy veteran aboard the USS Carl Vinson, and my co-founder and I, Xavier, actually operated the mechanical side of the nuclear operators aboard the aircraft carrier.
Wow. So that wasn't a 24-hour course, I take it.
Not at all. Definitely found out the hard way that wasn't my calling, nor was it Xavier's. So that's why we're out of the Navy now.
Yeah, very good. Well, listen, so you and your team have created this company called Prospect. Can you tell me a little about the problem that you're attempting to solve and then how you do it?
Absolutely. So Prospect is a platform that provides business tools for athletes to, one, grow their brand online, and two, to monetize their already existing fan base. The problem that we realized in the sports community is that up and coming athletes have to go and fund their competition costs, everything from coaching staff to supplements to gym fees. And a lot of these up and coming athletes, up until they gain sponsorship deals or scholarships in school, they usually fall off and have to go and have to work to get part-time jobs and to work to really fund their dreams. So we've had our own teammates in the gym sleeping on the mats. We've seen a lot of our friends have to give up on their dreams of becoming a world-class kickboxer just due to running out of funds and money. And we thought it was just a problem in the combat sports space, specifically MMA and kickboxing. But after doing a lot of research into it, we realized that it's across all sports at all levels, including NCAA sports, Olympics, and essentially every competitive sport out there.
So you're an athlete yourself?
Absolutely. My co-founder Raymond and I are amateur kickboxers. He's actually going into MMA and jiu-jitsu as well. And Xavier is an aspiring physique model or physique bodybuilder.
All right, very cool. So how do you solve this problem for the up and coming athlete?
So we took a couple steps back and we realized, this big problem of athletes struggling to pay for bills. And we looked at what was already out there. We noticed that a lot of athletes were going towards GoFundMe, towards campaign style crowdfunding. And when we were looking for something that was a little bit more perpetual to help athletes gain money on a monthly basis, there weren't too many options. A lot of them that we've seen work were platforms like Twitch, Patreon, and OnlyFans, which provide subscription content service tools to content creators. And we didn't find anything like that specifically for athletes. The issue with athletes generating money on those platforms is that they would have to do it in front of a computer. They would have to go and upload everything onto a desktop or a laptop and build their brand through a computer desk, when in reality, a lot of these athletes are either working or in the gym working out and training. So we decided to take what we've seen work with Patreon and Twitch and provide those business tools to athletes, but have everything through a mobile device. So pretty much taking what we've seen work in the other industries with their subscription content service tools and trying to have everything on a mobile device for an athlete to go and to grow their brand on.
Yeah. So the athletes that you're serving, if you could just give me an age range, young to old.
Specifically, we're looking at athletes between the ages of 16 to their, I would say, early 30s, while they're still in the prime of their competitive, the competitive age range. But in all reality, this can support, young athletes as long as their parents approve of them joining the platform and to monetize their fan base, or even athletes who have retired already. Specifically combat sports athletes who are, past the age of 40, or any athletes who aren't actively competing anymore, but have that fan base and are willing to go and provide, content for their fans and like members only perks for them. So specifically, I would say between the ages of 20 and 35.
All right, that's cool, because I have some buddies that are triathletes, and they compete in their 70s and 80s. But one of the issues is it costs money to compete, because if you're doing the Ironman in Hawaii, you got to fly to Hawaii and stay in hotels. So they're always looking for sponsors or ways to pay the bills. So
absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So it kind of begs the question, so why is this an opportunity now for Prospect? Why do this business now?
So one big reason now is the pandemic. A lot of sports events have been canceled. It has been a lot harder for athletes to find sponsorship dollars. And with a lot of those events canceled, we've actually seen, actually, let me backtrack. Sorry about that. With the pandemic, everything's been, canceled. A lot of sponsorship dollars have dried up. So it's a great opportunity for athletes to go and onto our platform and create profiles and to reach out directly to their fans for support. In exchange for that support, they can offer members only perks or, vlogs, tutorial videos, anything that their fans would like to get in exchange for the subscriptions that they would pay. So outside of the pandemic, on top of that too, with NCAA rules changing and the upcoming Olympics, these are great opportunities for these struggling athletes to go and monetize their fan base based on the upcoming events right now.
So you're an early stage startup. You guys have been working on this 18 months, 24 months?
I'll say about for the past 18 months.
Okay. So how have you been validating that this is going to work? What have you done to kind of test your concept?
So outside of, so we are a pre-revenue company. Well, actually, we've gained a little bit of monetary traction recently through one of our co-founders, Raymond. He actually created a profile and created subscriptions on Prospect, and he uploaded content to the platform. Raymond had a fight about 3 weeks ago, and he needed to raise funds for that fight to cover his a lot of his competition costs. So we reached out to his teammates, his family members, his close friends, and a couple of it, and through his social media as well. And Raymond was able to go and have all of those people subscribe to him, and he was able to generate about $1,000 in the past month of recurring monthly revenue for himself. So I would say we kind of did it on the spot with one of our founders to prove that people are willing to support athletes on a monthly basis leading up to their competitions.
All right, cool. So, being a pre-revenue startup and transitioning to the early stages of traction is really exciting. But taking a step back, if you go back 18 months ago, have you changed your business concept? Did you pivot along the way?
We haven't made any major pivots. The one that we have done, though, is expanding our market to all types of athletes. Originally, our game plan was to focus on combat sports because that's the group of athletes that we're a part of, the community that we're a part of. And like I spoke about earlier, we realized that this is a much bigger issue across the whole sports community. So instead of focusing on one group of athletes, we open it up to all sports. And recently with the NCAA changes, the rule changes to monetizing name, image, and likeness, we weren't planning on acquiring NCAA athletes onto our platform, but we decided to pivot on that based on the recent ruling. So we're opening it up not just to Olympians, not just to combat sports, but NCAA now recently.
So when I look at your concept, it's reasonably novel with its positioning, you know, with essentially all aspiring athletes. What's that like to pitch your concept? So you can pitch it to your users, right? And you can also pitch it to investors. Talk to me about that experience.
So 18 months ago, when we were pitching the idea to athletes and fans at sports expos, it was a little difficult getting the idea of the platform across and our business model. We were lucky, though, in a sense that we can make that comparison to Twitch and Patreon. And the content creator space has grown over the past couple of years, specifically with the pandemic. So when we tell athletes we're a mobile platform that provides tools just like Patreon and Twitch, they automatically understand the concept, and they like the idea of having content creation tools through their phone, similar to like Instagram stories, filters, and ways that they can create content on a mobile device rather than having to go and upload it and do all the post processing on a desktop. So they definitely get the idea. They like the idea of having it on a mobile device, and pitching to athletes, they're always trying to find a new revenue source or a new way to gain sponsors. So having visibility online and growing their brand online is something that all athletes are doing nowadays. Pitching to investors, it's a completely different animal. You have your wide range of investors. Luckily, we were lucky enough to have investors in the sports space, specifically ones who have competed at the highest level. We have like an NFL athlete investor right now who instantly understood the idea. But we've also had to pitch to other groups of investors who aren't in the sports space. And I think the biggest hurdle that we had to get over was explaining to them that not every athlete is driving a Bentley or is making millions of dollars. There's that 99% of athletes who still work a second job, even though they're competing in the upcoming Olympics. So it's been a challenge all around, but I believe we're starting to get the hang of pitching to a wide range of potential customers and investors.
Right. So you guys have seed investors today. You've got your what I would call your MVP launched. You've got proof of concept. You're beginning revenue. So what's next for you guys? How do you get this scaled?
Our goal over the next 6 months is to acquire a couple Olympic athletes and really, sponsor them and support them on their journey to the Beijing Games in February. Our goal is to turn these athletes into success stories on our platform to show that they can receive monetary support directly from their fan base through the subscriptions that they create, and really use that in our marketing campaign to show that fans are willing to support their favorite athletes And if we do it at a level at which there's a lot of visibility on the Olympic Games, a lot of these people supporting these athletes are going to be athletes themselves, and kind of have that flywheel effect where if they see somebody making money on our platform, that they're going to want to do that as well. And we want to scale it in that way. You use Olympic athletes leading up to that, as well as NCAA athletes with the recent rule changes, and just grow our sponsored athletes that we're supporting right now into success stories, so that they can show athletes around the world that this is a viable way to get support from their fans.
Yeah, I think the Olympic athlete is particularly interesting because prior to the games, I would say most are largely unknown to the population. I mean,
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, yeah, they may be, a particular athlete in a sport where they have some notoriety, but for most of us, we don't discover them until they're at the games themselves.
Yeah.
And then after that, then they've got a brand, right? Prior, maybe not so much. Right?
Yeah, depending on the athlete and how active they are online. A lot of these athletes I would consider as micro influencers, anywhere with followings between like 5,000 to 800,000 fans online, whether it's their hometown that's following them, or the colleges that they've competed at. They still have fairly strong followings on social media. And so I think with what we're doing with Prospect is giving them that visibility, and giving them the tools to go and reach out to their fan bases to get the support from whether it's their social media fan base or their close friends and family. We just want to provide them those tools to monetize their followings.
Well, Richie, I think you guys are really on to something. You've got a unique platform. You've got a strong team, and all you got to do now is execute and grow this thing. So let's get together next year at this event, and you can give us an update. All right?
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Right. And that was Richie Galinato, CEO of Prospect. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Ravi Sharma, who is CEO and founder of OOTify. And Ravi has a very special story to tell about his company and where they're going. So Ravi, if you could, what is OOTify exactly, and what are you trying to do?
Yeah, John, thank you so much for having me. So OOTify, we'll start with the name. It is a unique name. Ut in Hindi means to lift up. And what we're trying to do, John, is lift up the way in which mental health care is delivered. Now, when you think about the mental health care landscape, there's a lot of issues. There's a myriad of issues. It is a tough problem to solve. There's cost issues, there's stigma, there's access issues. And so what OOTify is meant to do is solve those problems, but also the navigation problem. So for me, my why, the reason I started this company is because I am a super user of the mental health care system, not by choice. No one is by choice. And so when you're trying to figure out what mental health resources are right for your family members or your friends, there's a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of waste. And so what we're trying to do is be that digital companion or that hub that gets you connected to the right intervention for you. And when I say intervention, it's really a mental health solution. So for me, what's worked is self-care exercises, therapy, coaching, and it's a very holistic approach to mental health care. And so we've built this patent pending hub, and our goal is to be able to use that for enterprises to solve the mental health crisis one day.
And those enterprises could be corporate, education, the military, or I suppose everywhere. Is that true?
That's correct, yes. So we're working with nonprofits, so sort of domestic abuse violence survivors that have received grant funding. So we have 5-year contracts with those types of institutions, higher ed institutions, and even corporate partners as well. Employee wellness, as you know, is becoming a focal point for not only managing attrition, but even recruiting and hiring the best talent today. So that's kind of the intersection of where we sit today.
And so when was the company started, and how would you describe your current stage?
Yeah, no, great question. So I like to think about stages in 2 ways. Number one, where are we from a business commercial traction perspective, and then one from a funding perspective, because we are a tech company that's venture backed. So from a commercial traction perspective, we started this company in 2018. We started direct to consumer, like most mental health companies. We went directly to the masses because that's a much larger opportunity. Realized very quickly that trying to sell directly to consumer, you really need to raise a lot more capital than an enterprise strategy. So within the past year, during COVID, we have pivoted to an enterprise strategy. You're seeing a lot of enterprises invest in therapy. It's been accelerated quite a bit. So the mental health landscape has become a little bit more welcoming of enterprises like OOTify to come in. So we are monetizing those enterprise contracts right now. Like I mentioned, we're patent pending, so we have 2 patents filed. We've done clinical trials successfully at Loyola Marymount University and USC. And so, from a traction perspective, I'd say we're kind of establishing product market fit and moving to the next phase, which is growth and scale. From the second piece, from the investor piece, I would say that we're a seed stage company is kind of the terminology that, as you are aware, is used in the space. We've raised about $1 million from quite a few different investors. I won't name them, but educational funds, 2 VCs, and 3 different angel groups. So pretty well subscribed, and in the process of kind of using that funding to propel us forward in this enterprise strategy.
Interesting. That gives me a good feel of exactly where you're at. You did a major pivot going from B2C to B2B, and it's kind of like going from minnows to whales in terms of your sales process, your solution, et cetera. That's and it's not an uncommon pivot, though. You kind of touched on it, right? So,
yeah, especially in our space. I think in digital health, in tech, you realize that unit economics are everything, right? You got to do the math. My background, I started at Merrill Lynch and have started companies before. And the companies that I started were always enterprise companies. And it's a longer sales cycle, but what you have is a captive audience, and you have the ability to control your destiny and build technology for a specific use case. So you're not casting a wide net, you're very focused, targeted. And when you're running a startup as an entrepreneur, especially a tech startup, we try to avoid a death by 1,000 swords, is the saying. So trying to be laser focused, and an enterprise strategy has really got us to do that.
Yeah. So, one of the issues I wanted to explore with you today is the human capital side of a startup that is getting traction and starting to scale. Can you talk a bit about, and it's a multi-headed question. So you've got a management team, you've got advisors, you have investors, you have partners. Can you tell me about the dynamics of those different players and how you collaborate with them?
Yeah. One thing I've learned in running a startup, especially with human capital, is you have to have thick skin. When you work in a corporate environment, that's where I spent most of my career post USC. Usually those people are with your company for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Sometimes they never leave, they stay in that company. At a startup, you got to have a thick skin because people will stay for a year and then they'll leave to the next best thing. You're seeing this in tech and Silicon Valley constantly happening. And so keeping your sort of managing your human capital is an art, it's a science, and it's also dollar bills, right? So you have to raise capital to be able to pay top dollar for top talent. That's just the way the world works. And so it has been a journey. We've been at this for about 3 years. We've started with a really strong marketing leadership team, kind of moved to more clinical and research, and now we're more focused on commercial traction. It's just a natural evolution of a digital health startup. So, I've had to rejigger the team to make sure that it fits kind of where we're going from a DTC to an enterprise strategy, right? If you're focused on DTC, marketing is important. But if you're starting to focus on very large institutions, enterprise strategy is important. Clinical health outcomes are important. You're working with insurance payers. You need to make sure that you have the data to support the fact that your solution will actually change lives and reduce the cost to insure their insurance book. And so we've had to bring on certain advisors, to your point. So we have advisors from the Los Angeles Department of Mental Health, from different research institutions like LMU and USC. And then we also have other advisors that are at tech startups that have worked at Lyft, Uber, some of the Dropbox, some of these large tech companies to kind of help us navigate the hurdles that you see in tech. Building tech is very difficult. It is probably the hardest thing when you see a bug in your production environment and you're trying to get it resolved overnight. Sometimes you get a lot of anxiety and you need OOTify to kind of help you pull yourself out of that anxiety. So again, user of my platform. So really important to have advisors to advise you. And then I am the CEO and co-founder, but I do have a board of directors. So I have a responsibility to my shareholders, but also to my board of directors that I report to. And it's really important to fill that board not only with people that are in the C-suite at the company or investors, but also independent board directors. So I was really thoughtful to bring in executives that have had 7-figure exits in their companies and financial services. I've brought in diversity and inclusion is very important to us. So I brought in a woman board of director that has had successful exits in the before in healthcare, and a huge angel investor actually helped us secure 25% of all the capital that we've raised today. And then also, I brought in one of our VCs, Tidecrest Capital, to kind of sit on the board because it's important to, have early advocates and champions kind of come along with this journey with you. So, board of directors are really important. And then, just talking about investors and partners, it's really important to have investor partners and financing partners that are going to help you, that are going to go to bat for you, that are going to make introductions, that are going to be your champions, and be there to pick up your phone when things aren't going well. Because I'll tell you, when we were going through that pivot, it was difficult. And I'm so thankful for our investors, these 3 angel groups that we raised for: deep healthcare experience, deep marketing experience, deep leadership experience to kind of help me navigate that. So I think that's been really helpful and really important to kind of surround yourself with people that are going to champion you and help you navigate pivots like that.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're assembling the right people at the right time. And, there's compensation, but a lot of it's deferred in a startup.
A lot.
So there's got to be a reason why people believe in what you're doing, or a shared vision. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I'll say it comes down to shared values. I'm very open about my story and why I got into this business. I've had friends battle mental health issues. I've lost a friend, graduate of UCLA, to suicide. And here we sit, it's September, Suicide Awareness Month, right? So I'm very vocal about that. I share why I'm doing this. I consider myself a social entrepreneur. I want to build a big business, but I want to make sure I do it responsibly. And sharing my story. And, we all have friends and family members that have battled mental health issues. We all have mental health challenges. But really kind of being open about it and transparent about it, I bring the right people that are willing to kind of support, maybe work less than get paid or compensated in certain instances and stages of our company than they should get, but they believe, and I try to reward them with sort of that delayed compensation package that you mentioned, right? Like the upside potential for a venture-backed tech startup is tremendous nowadays. There's a lot of capital coming into the space. So if you can sell the vision, bring people together based on your values and why you're doing this, you can really kind of have more impact together because you're passionate about it, and it reverberates amongst the team members.
One aspect of culture of a startup that I have observed is the tolerance of what I would call ambiguity. So that's because it's like every day is kind of a new day. Am I correct?
Okay.
And you have to have people that are comfortable with that type of changing environment.
Yeah, ambiguity requires resilience. And, for me, I try to be very forward about the mental health support that I'm getting. So I do have a mental health coach. And for me to kind of articulate my values and get the team members to share their values, that allows you to kind of manage that ambiguity and be resilient. So my values, it's 2 words: sine metu. So in Latin, that means to live without fear, which you have to if you're running a startup and you're being a little disruptive. But then in Hindi, which is my native tongue, it means to, you're in my heart. And that empathy and understanding that other people are going through challenges, they're going to need mental health days, or they're going to need a different type of support to manage this ambiguity. That culture can have a really great impact to get people to perform in ways that you wouldn't even imagine. And so, I've had employees that have been with me and partners that have been with me for 4 years before the company even really started. And they've been with me and they continue to support. And same goes for investors. So, I think ambiguity is part and parcel. It will be scary, but try your best to live without fear when you're building a company, and know that if you are open about this ambiguity, you embrace it and you let it kind of just flow through you and stay calm, big things are ahead of you. So that's kind of the culture that we try to build to support excellence at OOTify.
Yeah, speaking of build, so I have a good feel for where you've been and where you're at. As you scale the company, which could be very rapid, how do you scale that human capital and your culture? You see, is there a roadmap or are there mechanics to acquire the right talent while maintaining your culture?
Yeah, I think we talked about this before the setting this up. That is probably the toughest question, right? Because human capital and humans by nature, there's so many different aspects that drive them to kind of different vocational aspirations, right? So to be able to kind of retain that human capital and scale it with that culture, it is probably the hardest thing to do for a company. So you need to raise adequate capital. So you need to be fundraising, especially if you're a tech startup, to be able to pay a competitive wage, because you don't want people worrying about, whether or not there's another opportunity out there. You want them to be kind of laser focused on your your mission and what you guys are trying to do, because it's very difficult to do. And then from a culture perspective, you know, we are blessed because we are a therapy company and a coaching company, and we understand the importance of mental health and values. So culture is, at the end of the day, based on people's shared values, right? That's what culture is. There's a great book by James Collins. I don't know if you've heard of it, Good to Great. It's one of my favorite books, but he's basically, the whole premise of that book is, it doesn't matter what your business is, you're creating widgets, it doesn't matter. But if you have the right people, you can build the most amazing culture and company that's going to be wildly successful, because you'll figure it out if you have the right people. But if you have the best idea and you don't have the right people, it doesn't matter. So I believe that. It's one of the first books that I read kind of going to business school, and, you know, and it's undergrad business school at USC. And I think that's so important for human capital and scaling that and keeping that culture.
Well, I totally agree. You got to get the right people on the bus for the bus to go anywhere. And tell you what, I would love to have you come back in a year and tell us about your journey. Ravi, Sharma, CEO of OOTify, you've got something great going on here. Congratulations.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
Hello, everybody. It's my pleasure to have a conversation to hear stories from Jeff and Harte. Jeff is Chairman and Chief Investment Officer at Jackson Square Partners, which is an investment management fund that I gather primarily is in the public companies. Is that correct, Jeff?
Public equities, pretty much all concentrated in the growth space.
Exactly. So long-term value, right?
Long-term investment horizon, you know,
Yeah,
at least 5 years. Yep.
Right. And in addition to a career in that space, you've got an interest, an application maybe in early stage startups, and which begs the question, why invest in early stage startups?
Yeah, it's a good question, JJ. My perspective is, you know, somewhat colored by the public markets, because public markets are more efficient. So in the private markets, whether it's venture capital or private equity, you know, you generally have a chance to buy at better prices. There's more inefficiency. There's you know, the liquidity discount is there. So there's a potential for attractive returns in startups, and as a part of a, you know, portfolio diversifier too. I think it's a good thing. I also like the learning experience of private companies, because, you know, I may not be active in managing the company. I usually know the people pretty well, and you know, can watch the company develop from the ground up. So it's a good learning experience. You know, and I a lot of the ones that I'm attracted to too, I just like the people involved. So it's kind of, there's a social aspect of it also.
Yeah, I think that if I personally would come up with a list of criteria, I would put the people way at the top.
Yep.
Was it the author Collins who talked about in Good to Great, getting the right people on the bus, right?
Well, it's more critical. I think people, intellectual capital is more critical for startups because they're just more difficult to manage. So you have to have people that are, you know, pretty much living and sleeping the business 24/7 almost. And in the public markets, you know, you have more infrastructure, more formality. So they can withstand a little more, whereas the smaller companies definitely need, they need to kind of one up their game on their personnel.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And what's interesting in the classroom, as you know, I teach entrepreneurship. I have a strong distinction between a startup and a company. The startup wants to be a company,
right,
and is invariably imperfect, incomplete. Whereas the company at least knows who their customer is, has got a business model, and is starting to scale. So with that in mind, do you have an algorithm or a criteria for investing in startups? Like what would be investable?
Yeah, there's a couple of them. One of the things that I wouldn't necessarily put this in order, but it's something that I think is a real problem for a lot of startups, is their capital structure and their funding. Because even though that's a very financial thing, a lot of venture capitalists or angel investors in startup companies don't really think about that. They think about their technology and the cool idea they have, right? And they're sometimes just interested in getting funding for just one more year. And then after that 1 year, their business is going to develop and things will be great. But as you know, a lot of times it doesn't quite go that way. And so by the time they get to the end of the year, now they got to go through a whole other capital raise. So I like to have a plan in place there. But otherwise, a lot of the typical things that we would look for, would be credibility of management, some kind of unique idea or intellectual property or patent that makes them worth something. And then a revenue run rate where they've already acquired some credibility with, and having customers and the customers are, happy with the product. And then I'd say finally, just, the management team and what they're very clear. They're all on the same page, very clear about their strategic vision.
Yeah, I think that's super important. That culture and agreement about risk and where they're going. Oh my goodness, I can't think of an important ingredient for a company.
Yeah, I've seen so many times, JJ, companies get all this great stuff gets ruined by the fact that they're underfunded, and then the shareholders start bickering. People can get diluted unnecessarily, and it's a surprise. And the founder or key people that are involved in get totally distracted with that. And so I sometimes think that's one place that early stage companies don't pay as much attention as they should.
Yeah, I agree with you. I saw something the other day that the average early stage startup CEO spends 70% of her or his time on fundraising.
Yep.
And they're not running the business, they're raising capital, right?
Yes.
Just amazing. Often when an investor sits with a startup, there's a brush off to the startup. That is, well, I like what you're doing and I understand where you're at today. Why don't you come back in 6 to 9 months when you have more traction? With that in mind, what does traction mean to you when you're looking at a startup?
Yep, the old cart before the horse trick there, right?
Yeah.
Well, the ones that I've been on is always when they land a couple of key customers. I'm involved in a situation right now where they have a good technology, they have some customers, but they're working on a really big one. And if they get one or two, it changes, the whole game. It'll change their funding outlook, their ability to kind of move to the next level. So at the end of the day, customers and revenues are what validate your product. So I think that's, the key on that one. Traction can also be, though, you got a patent for technology, or there was a beta test that was really good. There can be other lighter forms of traction, But at the end of the day, the business does have to, sell the products and bring in revenues and cash flows.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're looking at a startup and it's an investment, but it's also within a portfolio, what are your expectations, maybe hopes for a return on investment and as well as a timeline?
I really don't like timeframes when it comes to early stage companies because they can take so long to play out. And so anything that I get involved with, I have a very long-term horizon because it's never going to go the way you think it's going to go. So I think you have to have a very long-term horizon. And, I guess I think like probably I'm standard and everybody else, I'd like, 10 times my money, but it depends on the risk of the company, in a technology company or, life sciences, healthcare, those tend to be riskier because they tend to have unproven technology in the early stages, hard to get customers. But in something that was maybe, a little more mundane, then I wouldn't have the same expectation of return, and would be okay with that, because the risk is less. So to me, it's always a risk spectrum. But so not one number fits. It's just depends on how much risk there is that I see, in the business. Almost all startups are risky. It's just some are riskier than others.
Yeah, I agree with you there. In fact, AngelList and TechCrunch both suggest that for the startups that they track, which are usually the better ones, that a 7-year exit is kind of average. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
And although oftentimes when you hear the pitch from the startups, they're saying, "Hey, well, it could happen in 3 years." Well, it could. doesn't mean it will, right? So
the only thing I would say these days, and this is part of my public markets talking, is because we've reached sort of new, what I would call almost exponential developments in technology and in terms of the microprocessor's power and so forth, that it can go. In my feeling is it's probably going to go quicker going forward if you have a legitimate idea, because it'll get into Series A and B really quick, and if it's any kind of really good idea, the public markets will fund it at really big valuations. So it can go quicker. All the more reason probably in the early stages to think about just how good or nonlinear, how big of a game changer is the technology. If it's really good, it'll go quicker.
So as an investor, and in this context, an early stage investor, do you prefer to invest by yourself, or is it better to collaborate with other investors? What's your comfort?
But I almost always collaborate with other investors, because then you have different perspectives and skills and talents that can be brought into the company through the shareholder base. I'm really, all my life, I've been a capital allocator. I mean, I have run a money management business where I do have to do things that founders have to do. But, to our prior discussion points, I mean, as oftentimes it took me away from investments, right? Actually doing things that I really wanted to do, but you have to do some of that. But as an investor, I really don't want to get involved with the day-to-day management stuff. I want to hear what other investors think about the company, the perspectives they bring, and then, the interactions with management. I think collectively then, you can build a sort of a more coherent view of the future and help, build the strategy of the company.
Then finally, as you look at the different sectors that are out there, clearly, I know it's trendy, but there are certain sectors that the public markets, which would be the downstream for the startup, get rewarded at a much higher level than others. And generically, just software as a service, as an example, captures a multiple, many times higher than food products, things like that. What's your view on if you're going to place a bet? Which sectors would you consider today?
Well, one sector that I don't know much about, but I think is huge and benefiting from Moore's law type economics would be genomics and life sciences. I don't have a good background though in understanding that, so I would probably not invest in a one-off deal there. I would do a fund. But the other two spaces that I do know something about would be technology. Essentially, we're dematerializing products and services, and my feeling is after COVID, this just went nonlinear. We're all finding that we can work from home and we can work in the ether, and the public markets view of it has changed also over the years. I think basically today, venture capitalists and public markets participants think that if you're going to get a big company, big winner, that's going to dominate its space, it's going to cost you $5 to $10 billion, and that's what everybody just believes. And so if you can get that kind of funding from the angel stage to the public markets, you have the chance to create a $100 billion market cap or even higher. And that's how the markets are thinking about it, I think, at this time. The other really interesting development, which I think I mentioned to you, is I believe blockchain is going to really change the world. We're not experiencing that necessarily through the public markets right now. We're experiencing it through autonomous, decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs as they're called. And that is a very, very interesting development. And the engineers in that space are getting compensated through tokens. We've never seen this before. And so, blockchain on top of these decentralized companies and venture capitalists also pitching in, because they'll put up hard cash in their stages. I see blockchain developing really, really quickly, and it's a space that it's hard to know exactly what it's going to look like, but in 5 years, I think it's going to blow your socks off as to where that's going.
Yeah, I don't mean to catch you potentially off guard. Did you see the announcement that China was muffling blockchain and cryptocurrency?
Oh, well, they've been against, they don't like Bitcoin because it goes against the fact that they're trying to do a central bank digital currency. So that will be a blockchain based technology. They just don't want, they want to monitor all of their citizens and capital flows. So I actually, though, even though it was kind of maybe a short-term negative for maybe Bitcoin, because a lot of Bitcoin mining was done in China, personally, that was also one of the risks to Bitcoin and blockchain over a period of time, that the Chinese would dominate it. And when you have domination, in a blockchain or a mining platform, you can have security issues. So since I think it's good that it's diversifying away from China, and from what I can see in the space, it's just attracting massive amounts of capital and engineering talent. So that almost, when that happens, I can just tell you the odds are that it's going to be big.
Yeah, it's clearly the Wild West in crypto right now, and I think that's part of the appeal. Well,
Yep.
Jeff, so much for joining us, and you've got an invite to come back next year and give us an update on what happened with crypto as well as startups. So thank you so much.
Thank you, JJ. It's always fun to talk with you.
everybody. I'm John Jackson. It's my pleasure today to have a one-on-one discussion with Barry Sandrew, who is director of the Center for Entrepreneurship at Westcliff University. And Barry also is running an incubator, and which is a really cool thing. And I kind of wanted to explore that with you today, Barry, if that's all right.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's get really basic. What does an incubator do for an early stage startup?
Well, John, one important thing to understand about incubators is that the definitions and models of what an incubator is are probably as numerous as there are incubators. And there's often a blurry line separating incubators from accelerators. But in general, incubators help startups bootstrap in their early stages. They focus on early stage startups that may or may not have a polished business model in place. And they work with them to develop their vision into a viable product. The help comes in the form of mentoring, guidance, co-working space, high-tech infrastructure, and often intros to funding sources. And though some incubators also provide funding. Before COVID and the trend toward virtual incubators, incubator co-working spaces were great collaborating environments. And they instilled a certain camaraderie and solidarity because after all, everyone in those incubators were in the same boat. They were challenging and inspiring environments. You mentioned at Westcliff. At Westcliff, we decided to buck that trend, and we brought 4 companies on campus to better establish an entrepreneurial culture, not only for the companies, but for our faculty and students.
Hey, you bring up an interesting point, the collaboration amongst the startups in an incubator. I have personally witnessed some startup founders that were candidly lonely, and they appreciate that collaboration.
Oh, totally. And, there's something I heard somebody mention once called intentional serendipity. I know it's an oxymoron, but basically those lucky networking opportunities are only going to happen when you're co-located in a co-working environment. And I think that incubators are going to suffer long-term if we don't get back to that.
Yeah, maybe so. It kind of begs the question, when should a startup consider joining an incubator? And the startup journey sometimes is many months, if not years. Given that, what would you recommend?
Well, Frank, an incubator program is only right for a startup if that startup has real actionable goals for the time that they'll be spending in the incubator. And those goals are the ones that the founders feel are unlikely to be achieved without the resources and support of that environment. Certainly there are alternatives such as outside mentors and consultants that people can consider, a startup can consider. A startup really has to weigh the cost and or equity they have to expend to get where they want to be. There are 2 types of incubators. There's early stage incubators that help entrepreneurs turn their ideas into successful businesses, and they provide startups with mentorship through experts such as financial strategy, business plans, operations management, marketing strategy, branding, as well as how to pitch to investors. And then, there are late stage incubators, often called accelerators, where they already have an MVP, a minimal viable product, and they may even have market traction. those incubators, or accelerators help access the startup to investors and also partnerships and that sort of thing. So it really comes down to the cost of that the founder is ready to spend on getting to where they want to be.
Yeah, I get it. And it also begs the question about the startup founders' coachability. I don't think there's a real word but I'll use that. I hear investors talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
And you certainly hear that word in incubators. How do you react to that word, coachable?
Now, sometimes I think there's too much emphasis on coachability. I mean, every entrepreneur should understand the possibility that there's something they don't know, and that there's something that could make a difference in the growth of their startup. Let's face it, being coachable is an important life skill anyway. That's why they have golf pros. In terms of the incubators I've been involved with, we talked about Evo Next. I've been involved with them for 12 years. And it's a great incubator. You can typically spot problems with a founder during the Q&A following an elevator pitch, way before due diligence. When an entrepreneur becomes immovable, argumentative during the selection committee questioning, typically the selection committee members look at each other in a knowingly way, and you don't have to say a word, right away. This person doesn't really need to be in an incubator. They've got all the answers. And it's kind of a waste of our time to engage them. Being coachable doesn't imply you don't know your market or your customers. It means you're open to seeking out someone to help you better understand some of the hidden aspects of your startup, like customer behavior, technology, performance, marketing skills, and there's so much more. It means you're willing to have a discussion about something that might help you improve something related to your startup. But it's typically the first thing you hear from those in an entrepreneurial support community. Is that entrepreneur coachable? Does he or she take advice from mentors and advisors, incubators, management staff? It's important for management, for the founders to be open to suggestions. But this doesn't mean the entrepreneur has to hand over authority to the incubator. You don't have to react to all or any of the advice you receive. Entrepreneurs get inundated with and sometimes overwhelmed with advice from advisors and mentors. And sometimes that advice might not be reliable, especially when the mentors have limited experience in the technology and the industry application that they're reviewing. To me, coachability is the ability to listen and to use critical thinking. That's a skill that's being lost today, before making a decision. You have to be willing to collect opinions from experienced people and validate that information. Being coachable allows an entrepreneur to set a viable course, but also be ready to pivot when needed, very much like a good quarterback.
Yeah, very well said, Barry. The only thing that I might add is that, and we touched on it, is they need to listen, they need to be coachable, but it's their persistence and determination and arguably passion, which is going to carry them forward. So to have some spine, I think, is a good thing for that entrepreneur.
Yeah, ultimately, it's up to their instincts.
Yeah. An issue that I hear with incubators and accelerators is, should the startup founder be all in, full time, or can they moonlight their way to success?
That's
What's
a
your
good
take?
question. Well, my initial reaction to that is no. In all my startups, I was committed 100% in building the technology and the critical mass team. And I mean, I've been involved in a number of startups, but 3 of them I did from scratch. I founded them all alone. I created them in an empty room with 1 computer, and my last company grew to 1,200 employees. But not everyone can afford to do it that way. I mean, moonlighting can mitigate risk and can keep food on the table, while you're building, but that takes a lot of discipline. And one thing you really have to be cognizant of is that the business you're building away from your full-time job cannot in any way be competitive with your current employer. You can't ethically compromise yourself by using any resources, especially any confidential resources of your current employer. And it's so important to understand this. I think that's one of the caveats you have to assess. If you're earning a buck, you need to put an earnest buck worth of time in. Otherwise, you're cheating or taking advantage of your employer. But yes, I think moonlight is viable, but you just have to be very, very careful when you're doing that.
Yeah, I think fair enough. Another interesting phenomena is, particularly on the early stage startups, is the ideas, the business concepts, ultimately the business model may not be very refined. And without significant pivot or change, they could fail. Would you consider failing or even failing fast an acceptable outcome at an incubator?
Yeah, well, that comes from Crumbolts and Babineau, fail fast, fail often. That was based on their observations of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. I personally like John Maxwell's rephrasing of that title. Maxwell says, fail early, fail often, but always fail forward. Basically, the idea is that you learn by doing. The idea is that indecision comes from heavy risk evaluation and overly conscientious planning. If you're too careful, you're not going to progress. When you develop or build with limited risk, it also limits the spectrum of actions you can take and also your potential outcome. So, when you list your anticipated and unexpected results, you progress in a direction that may even be at odds with your initial ideas. Failing fast or often is about succeeding by learning from the results of incremental but structured activity. It's called iteration, basically, risk-taking and iteration. It's learning, I heard somebody else, it's learning by doing when you don't know what you're doing. And it's critical to take risks, but small risks as you develop.
Yeah, spot on, because I think that ambiguity is real life in a startup, because you're inventing something, you're creating something, and the path before you is not necessarily clear. Yet I would say you got to confirm that the dog will hunt. And if the dog is going quack, 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 you got a problem. And you need to pivot, or maybe failing is the right outcome in that case. Finally, a question. So you're running an incubator. How do you track your success of the incubator?
Yeah, that's an important question. Really, you have to look at 3 different aspects: pre-program, in-program, and post-program. For pre-program, is who applied to the program that you didn't accept. This is kind of your control group. You have to track their progress on AngelList and Crunchbase or whatever, and check out their web every 3, 6, 12 months. And you have to keep a ratio of who's still in business and what their track record is, and maintain information on the management. Are they still with the company and that sort of thing? So you really get an understanding of, did you make a mistake or you have to learn from that basically. But that becomes your control group. Those are the ones that you rejected. And then in program, what current customers and revenue, what are the current customers, revenue per customer, acquisition costs, average revenue per user, churn rate, sales funnel. You have to look at all of these metrics of the company while they're in the program. Also, what mentors or advisors did they meet with during the program? What role did those mentors and advisors take with the company? And of course, average growth in the last month or so. And then post-program, you have to look at, again, basically the same thing as the in-program stuff, but beyond the program. Once they've graduated, you have to look at their average growth, their sales funnel, et cetera. And most important, what mentors or advisors are still with the company? Which ones are still advising the company? That's an important metric as well.
What about funding? Would you look at that?
Funding, of course. That's a given. That's obviously a success metric. It's so obvious that I didn't mention it. But obviously, funding is a success metric for any incubator.
Yeah, so I know some incubators seem to obsess, because that's part of their business model, is to get the startup funded and ultimately get a capital event. But I think your summary is spot on. So Barry, I really appreciate you joining us today. Any closing comments or words of wisdom you'd like to pass on to the listeners, the viewers?
No, it was a pleasure talking to you. Westcliff is we talked about various types of incubators. Westcliff is a little bit different in that the whole purpose of our on-campus incubators is to engage the companies and our faculty and students in a synergistic relationship, and that's the only outcome that we're interested in. We're not interested in equity or anything like that. So we've got kind of an unusual program at Westcliff, and it's a work in progress. We're still working on it.
Well, Barry, Sandrew, thank you so much. And
sure.
Let's stay in touch. Take care.
Thank you, Jim. Bye-bye.